This debate is everywhere right now. The British monarchy has faced repeated calls for reparations.
I've long believed
for historic
that
links to the slave
this country
trade.
should address the original sin of slavery.
Even today, the topic of slavery still brings up so many
So it's officially on the table.
Racism, Confederate statues, and lately, reparations.
That great black elephant in the room.
Voted to approve recommendations on how the state can compensate black residents for historic discrimination.
For this conversation, I'd really like to skip all the wrangling.
But appears to be cooling on its advice, perhaps because it could cost $1.2 million per person.
The arguments back and forth,
The descendants of slaves.
for and
we have
against,
got to address that. Again, it's back to
and
the
categorically state that
links to the slave trade.
We're entitled to
reparations
money, land,
will
and
happen.
the financial things that we were forced out of.
For it is prophecy.
I believe that $5 million in
Firstly,
reparations is too little for the work that foundational Black Americans have
let's
done.
take a look at
and as well for other countries. I believe that 7.6 million
the
is
reason
a number that can be used very wisely.
An opponent of reparations, calling into the meeting, slammed the idea as unfair.
Slavery ended 160 years ago.
So people are kidnapped
Taxpayers, many from families like mine who came to the U.S. after slavery ended
and dispersed across the face of the earth
The people involved have long since died, both
as beasts
perpetrators
of burden.
Black residents may not receive cash payments anytime soon, if
Raped,
ever, because the state legislature
robbed,
and governor would need to
pillaged,
sign off.
Owning land was your best opportunity
abused,
to be successful and leave
and
something
insulted.
for your children. We've replaced land with opportunity in this country.
And then
That's the
told
difference. What this group does or this artist does
to forget about it.
They want opportunity. They want the finished product. They want to be given the rewards without the work. And this country is about work, regardless of what color you are.
The problem is we've forgotten how to be genuinely proud of our great country. Both America and the United Kingdom, two of the greatest countries in the world. But every day now, somebody somewhere, normally on the left, the woke left, is queuing up to find a reason to hate the countries and their history.
Well, it's a kind of grievance competition. I don't know what hurt she believed. I don't know what hurt she believes she's had from slavery. All of this was addressed 2 centuries ago.
Today, Nigeria does not own its own oil reserves, which is still the third largest in the world, but BP and Shell and Exxon owns all the rights of the oil. Who did that? The IMF and the World Bank. These are the Kafirs we're dealing with.
I see no interest across Africa in paying reparations for selling their brother and sister Africans into slavery.
He picked the wrong guest to try to play the reparations card.
Because the African kings were rounding up their own people. They had them on cages waiting in the beaches. No one was running into Africa to get them. And I think you're totally right. If reparations need to be paid, we need to go right back to the beginning of that supply chain and say who was rounding up their own people and having them handcuffed in cages. Absolutely, that's where they should start. And maybe, I don't know, the descendants of those families where they died in the high seas trying to stop the slavery, that those families should receive something too, I think, at the same time.
Devils.
Well, that's an interesting discussion. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt or their presumed hurt.
They beheaded 100 freedom seekers, pierced those heads with spikes, and then lined 60 miles of the busiest thoroughfare in the city with these bloody, lifeless faces. Intimidation. Then they planted propaganda in the media in what appears to be justification for their sadism, calling the freedom seekers basically terrorists deserving extermination. I'm talking about the 1811 German Coast Uprising, the largest rebellion of enslaved people in the U.S., and most of us have never heard of it.
So the one thing Germany was not expecting to come out of South Africa's case at the ICJ was the fact that the world would now finally come to learn about the mass atrocities that they, the Germans, committed against Africans, the ones that they will not acknowledge or atone for. How the Germans between 1904 and 1908 were in Namibia. How they called that land German Southwest Africa.
101 years ago, America had what was essentially a purge during the summer of 1919. You've probably never heard about this before because it doesn't fit the apple pie, baseball Americana stories that we tell ourselves about our past. The Red Summer of 1919 is one of the worst events of racial violence America has ever seen. Black Southerners were moving north to escape the brutal Jim Crow laws of the South. White people saw black people as competition for jobs, homes, and political power. That summer, white mobs started attacking black people while the police and military often joined in. In 61 cities across the country, more than 270 black men, women, and children were burned alive, shot, lynched, or beaten to death by these white mobs.
Britain, like America and France, are the most desired destinations for migrants worldwide. It's not because we're racist, it's because we're better. It's because we're good.
Congo is going through a silent holocaust right now, and millions of people have been unalived. And do you guys know who profits from this whole conflict? America, Britain, France, and Israel.
So what we have is a situation where the more virtuous countries are presented as the worst countries. It's sick, and most of us are tired of it.
Tricksters, continuing to make developing countries markets for consumption.
Well, that's an interesting discussion. Pretty. An interesting discussion.
White family worth is 69 times more than that of black families. Given this disparity, how can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't... You know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
I believe that history is the most important subject of all. For this time, for it would garner knowledge of self, and it would be an armor for oneself, providing the ability to refute one's accuser in stating that
about this enormous disparity, which actually originates with the failure to provide the formerly enslaved in the United States with the 40-acre land grants that they were promised.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land.
With the actual granting of 160-acre handouts to white Americans in the western part of the country under the terms of the Homestead Act.
Through an act of Congress, government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest.
It's called redlining, when the government signaled to banking that lending in certain areas is a bad idea.
It meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor.
Nearly 100-year-old discriminatory lending practices called redlining.
Hancher said the problem is those red lines were consistently drawn around black communities.
Today, redlining is still being felt, the effects of it.
And created separate cities within a city, some areas, and the people there is bad.
Which, due to segregation and Jim Crow laws, disqualified African Americans from living in white suburban neighborhoods. A description of the city that is most talked about as the bad part of town.
Or almost always black communities.
So that's the foundation for this enormous racial wealth gap.
That is an example of redlining.
Tragically, as y'all would know, there is a version of this ill will wherever a black community could be found.
Thing that you need in the school or could use in the school is not there.
There's something about life in a segregated city that produces generations of children who don't get anywhere near the potential to realizing the potential they had when they were born.
Driving through the streets of Chicago, my hometown, it's not hard to... And suddenly you're in a very different part of town.
Nor is the difference more startling than in Chicago's public schools. See the difference from one neighborhood to the next.
Conditions at their school are so bad that they're struggling to get an education.
Racial comments? Like, I'm not coming down to teach those animals.
For decades, the American government has been accused of intentionally flooding the streets with hard drugs. The CIA and law enforcement have supposedly been funneling drugs into the inner cities, and to the African American community in particular, as part of a covert effort to stop them attaining stability, building wealth, and achieving political power.
Former Vice President Joe Biden seems primed to be at the head of a crowded Democratic 2020 field, but his role as a leading architect in America's crackdown on drugs could be a major liability for his campaign.
Danilo Blandon, who also was my informant, he's the guy that set me up with the police. When I went to trial, we found out that he was what they call a Contra. The Contras was backed by the CIA, and it sparked this big investigation by this reporter called Gary Webb.
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
The story grabbed attention across the US, particularly amongst the African American community, which had been targeted by law enforcement following the rise of crack.
This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras.
Then in 1994, Biden spearheaded the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, a bill that touched nearly every aspect of law enforcement and is credited for leading to a boom in for-profit prisons and mass incarceration.
You know, some social engineering going on here. Who benefits and profits off our bickering and our division? Who's like follow the money? Take rap music.
Let's take it.
Same people who own the labels own the prisons. The records that come out are really geared to push people towards that prison industry. You know, some records are made by committee, meaning record company guys sit around and tell the artists, this is hot, say that, do this. We're going to have this guy write the lyrics. Being controlled by the label, this is how they do it. You know, the record company pushing the narrative.
Literally the same people?
Literally the same people who own the labels own private prisons.
If by that you mean that the people who run the record companies may have stock in prisons, private prisons, that's possible. Financial interest in it.
They have financial interest.
Okay. The theory, if I'm following correctly, is that the kind of stuff in rap lyrics works as a funnel to get people inspired to do the kind of things that would get them in prison.
Some social engineering going on here.
A people thoroughly hated and plotted against.
Those are the facts. But I can tell you from you write
Still,
a check to
for the sake of self-analysis,
black, white,
not everything spouted by the accuser
homeless,
can be
whatever.
wholly discounted.
You give any group of people that much money and you come back in 6 months, they're going to be broke.
You can say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris.
All right, hold on a second.
It's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves.
That would be an absolute disaster.
No one ever says that there's going to be mismanagement of funds when we're talking about the distribution of reparations payments to other communities.
We know that Israel suffers for the worst leadership of any nation on earth. We know of those rulers who avidly sing the praises of colonial institutions, much to the disregard of their own king,
countries to privatize, cost-cutting, abolishing social
who have long been injured by them.
and so on.
Under the same IMF program, we bought buses that had not been bought for 13 years. Under the same IMF, we built out a new accident and emergency. The same IMF, however, was the only entity in the COVID environment that stepped up and provided rapid disbursement funds to all countries globally. Just because an entity behaved one way in the past, we need to go back to its fundamentals. So I hope that helps give you a perspective. I'm not here to defend him, I can assure you.
The point is, reparations isn't for everyone.
If I give you $20,000 and you just spent it, you're most likely not spending with black people. Realistically, right? You're not spending with black people. It's going back to the same person we have an issue with, the same system. That's what I want to be clear about.
Let me start off by saying this. My payment, my choice. If I want to go drink up my payment, that's me.
No. For there is a criteria. Reparations are for a particular set, for an appointed time. It is stated that the Creator, in his use of even scales, will recompense those who have suffered under this world's power, yet kept his cause, and, most importantly, one must be of the lineage of the disenfranchised house of Israel. And this is their happy ending. What are these ships that skim along like clouds, like doves returning home? They are ships coming from distant lands, bringing the Creator's people home. They bring with them silver and gold to honor the name of the Creator, the Holy Ruler of Israel, who has made all nations honor his people. You will tremble with excitement. The wealth of the nations will be brought to you. From across the sea, their riches will come. The time is here, says the Creator, when I will gather together the people I punished, those who have suffered in exile. They are crippled and far from home, but I will make a new beginning with those who are left, and they will become a great nation. You will crush many nations, and the wealth they got by violence you will present to me, the ruler of the whole world. I will bring them from the north and gather them from the ends of the earth. People will no longer swear by me as the living ruler who brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. Instead, they will swear by me as the living ruler who brought the people of Israel out of a northern land and out of all the other countries where I had scattered them. They will live in their own land. Jerusalem will be a sacred city. Foreigners will never conquer it again. Look around you and see what is happening. Your people are gathering to come home. Israel will join with Judah, and together they will come from exile in the country in the north, and will return to the land that I gave your ancestors as a permanent possession. I will restore my people, Israel and Judah. I will bring them back to the land that I gave their ancestors, and they will take possession of it again. There will be no weeping there, no calling for help. Babies will no longer die in infancy, and all people will live out their lifespan. Those who live to be 100 will be considered young. To die before that would be a sign that I had punished them. People will build houses and get to live in them. They will not be used by someone else. They will plant vineyards and enjoy the wine. It will not be drunk by others. Like trees, my people will live long lives. They will fully enjoy the things that they have worked for. The work they do will be successful, and their children will not meet with disaster. I will bless them and their descendants for all time to come. Even before they finish praying to me, I will answer their prayers. Wolves and lambs will eat together. Lions will eat straw, as cattle do, and snakes will no longer be dangerous. On Zion, my sacred hill, there will be nothing harmful or evil. Now you will have plenty to eat and be satisfied. You will praise the Creator, your ruler, who has done wonderful things for you. My people will never be despised again. Then Israel, you will know that I am among you, and that I, the Creator, am your ruler, and there is no other. My people will never be despised again. Once again, old men and women, so old that they use canes when they walk, will be sitting in the city squares, and the streets will again be filled with boys and girls playing. This may seem impossible to those of the nation who are left now, but it is not impossible for me. It will be your own land, and it will never again let your children starve. I solemnly promise that the surrounding nations will be humiliated, but on the mountains of Israel, the trees will again grow leaves and bear fruit for you. My people Israel, you are going to come home soon. I am on your side. Many nations will help the people of Israel return to the land which the Creator gave them. And there, these nations will serve Israel as slaves. Those who once captured Israel will now be captured by Israel. And the people of Israel will rule over those who once oppressed them. Listen, as for that group that belongs to Satan, those liars who claim that they are Jews and are not, I will make them come and bow low at your feet. They will all know that I love you. Reparations isn't some political endeavor to be handled by the current crop of useless 2-day-1 puppet assimilates of white Western powers for things to go as they always do, with nepotism and supersession and the distribution of wealth not reaching the lowly, for it is their reward. Seemingly there are two different Bibles at play in society, in which the popular virgin, the Christian virgin, bears no regard for centuries of Negro abuse on this earth.
Race is
and all things are
actually
settled
a
in
social
death.
construct. The concept of race is not a biblical concept. It's not a biblical idea. It is a constructed idea. You won't find the idea of races in the Bible unless you find it in the proper historical context, where we see, number one, that we are all the race of Adam. Amen? One race, one blood. In fact, we're not even different colors. Technically, from a genetic perspective, from a biochemistry perspective, we're all actually the same color. We've all got melanin, just to differing degrees. But no, we're just different shades of the same color. And I want you to listen to me on this. Listen to me. Just because you don't have as much melanin as I do, don't you dare think God doesn't love you as much as he loves me, because he gave me more.
Whereas the lesser known book,
Go away! You are detained and you're not free to go. For eating. It's illegal. Turn around.
it's all about them.
Turn around now. I've done nothing wrong. Turn around, man.
capturing State Supreme Court Justice Aaron Gall threatening to shoot a group of black teenagers.
They'll be shot on the property.
I'm
just letting you know. Because when they trespass, just shoot them on the property.
Just come here and just...
No.
Niglets, you're making threats. Can you arrest Niglets?
God, I love little fucking monkeys.
Talk the fucking talk. 19 shots fired.
It never ends. It is this vicious cycle of gun violence and racism and fearing for our safety.
I'll tell you
when
what
does
it
it end?
Revelations
There's
6,
a lot of people who will stay and fight.
9-14.
I think
it tells
it
you
is incredibly
that these saints,
there are
all of
also
our brothers and
people who
sisters who've been taken out over time
that they are
in the
safe
so-called Americas and the four corners of the earth, they're asking a question. How long? How long shall we wait? Well, the Lord told them. He gave an answer. We saw the lady unalived in Chicago. That was we know what that was. That was an extermination. And one thing about it is that this has been going on in America for a long time.
That our family members aren't safe, and that we are just moments away from being racially profiled, and the potential of our life being taken away. This is why we're leaving.
So, which virgin will you roll with? Israel bless.